Hi, my name is Kathleen Joy A. Mantilla, and I am the first reporter for this chapter. Chapter 4, The Fundamental Principles of Ethics. I'll discuss one fundamental principles of ethics. Ethics is a science that investigates the nature of human conduct. In order to investigate the nature of human conduct, it is important that we differentiate between the human act or and the act of man. So the distinction between these two is an important process to determine the morality of man's action. In this chapter, the fundamental principles and postulates of ethics will be discussed. So these fundamental concepts are necessary because they will serve as guides in our evaluation and judgment of the morality of human act. So the first fundamental principles of ethics is the nature of human act. So what is human act? Human acts are actions that proceeds from the deliberate will of human being. So these are also actions that a man properly master, for he does them with full knowledge and of his own will. Human acts also involves a man's responsibility and accountability of the results of his or her actions. So human acts are characterized into four as the free and voluntary acts of man. So it is done voluntarily and with the free will of man. Second, it acts done with knowledge and consent. Third, acts which are proper to man as a rational being, since man has been gifted with rationality and freedom of will. And fourth, acts which are conscious and under our control and for which we are responsible. We human are responsible with this act. So acts, therefore, in order to be truly human, it must be done deliberately, intentionally, and willfully carried out by the agent. Because without knowledge, consent, and willful choice on the part of the doer of the act, so there can be no human acts. So kung wala dili siya intentionally, walay knowledge and consent, o dili kanang dili gibuhat in his own will sa usa ka tawo, sa doer sa act, so dili ni siya mahimong human act. So on the other hand, acts of man refers to certain types of actions that are naturally exhibited by a man or morally indifferent or neutral. Because in this case, we cannot judge if it's either ethical or unethical. So therefore, acts of man are natural acts that we perform by virtue of our nature as an animal being. Acts of man is categorized into two. First one is the natural and voluntary actions. So these are actions that of man perform intuitively or involuntarily. Involuntarily by means of kanang wa na to jua or wa na to giunahuna to do this act. For example, blinking of the eyes, metabolism, and beating of the heart. So it's an action done involuntarily, nga part na sa atong pagkatao. So the second category of acts of man is the natural voluntary actions. So these are actions within the control of man's will, but only for some period of time. So these are actions that we human beings, we ourselves control this. So for example, sleeping, eating, walking, or watching TV. Also take note that there are special circumstances where some acts of man, particularly the natural voluntary actions, may become human acts and therefore may be judged to be either moral or immoral. For example, watching, for instance, is a neutral activity. However, if one watches pornography, watching in this case becomes an immoral action because pornography is uh, bad. Second, sleeping is also considered as neutral activity of a man. But when a student, for instance, sleeps while on class, his actions becomes unethical because it's not right to sleep while the teacher is in or while on a discussion while on class. Good day everyone, my name is Aizal Joy A. Tampos and I'll be discussing today the human acts in relation to reason. So, human acts are acts which proceeds from the conscious and deliberate free will of man. When you say reason, this is an individual's personal justification based on their ethical and moral code. So there are three types of human acts. These are the good acts, evil acts, and indifferent acts. So when you say good acts, these are actions done in harmony with the dictate of right reason. So obeying the rules and regulations of the company because you know that it is the proper or right thing to do. As an employee, evil acts. These are actions done in contradiction with the dictates of right reason. Example is, you are aware that embezzling money from the company is unethical, but then you still continue to perform the thing. Next is indifferent acts. So these are actions that are neither good nor evil. So it has no positive or negative relation to reason. The next topic is the voluntariness of human acts. So human acts have three essential elements. These are the knowledge, freedom, and voluntariness. When you say knowledge, it resides in the intellect and is a mindfulness of what the moral agent is doing, thinking, or willing. Freedom is the quality of the free will by which one is able to choose between one or more alternatives. It is also called consent. Voluntariness requires full consciousness of the nature of one's act and its consequences. So the concept of voluntariness is important in ethics because only voluntary acts have moral bearing. This means that because human acts are performed by man with knowledge and consent, he is therefore responsible for his actions. However, the degree of culpability will, by and large, depend on the degree of his responsibility. So there are four categories of voluntariness. The first one is the perfect voluntariness. These are actions performed with full knowledge and consent. The second is imperfect voluntariness. These are actions that occur when there is no perfect knowledge and consent, or when either or both of the knowledge or consent is partial. Third is direct voluntary. These are actions that are intended for its own sake, either as a means or an end. Example is stealing and murder. The fourth one is indirect voluntary. These are actions that are not intended for its own sake, but which merely follows as a regrettable consequence of an action. Example is bombing an enemy's hideout that leads to the killing of non-combatants within the area. So indirect voluntary actions are still considered voluntary act for the simple reason that when we act, we will the whole act including its consequences. And since we place the cause, we also indirectly will the effect, although this is in itself regrettable. This means that we are responsible for the consequences of our actions even if these are not intended. Causa causae existiem causa causate, which means the cause of the cause is also the cause of the thing caused. To fully understand this phrase, example is A is speeding down the road and run a red light, causing a car B at the intersection to brake too suddenly, which causes the car C behind that car B to rear-end B. The cause why car C rear-ended car B was because car B suddenly braked.
car B suddenly brake because of the speeding of car A who ran a red light. So, the cause of the cause is also the cause of the thing caused. Therefore, A can be held responsible for the rear end. A's actions caused the cause of the accident and therefore caused accident.
Hi, this is Zhang Tangso, and my report is the moral principle involved in actions having two effects: the indirect voluntary act. Most of the time, this principle is referred to as the principle of double effect. An act, an act having, an act being done, resulting to two actions, hence double effect. One good effect and the other bad effect or evil effect. A difficult question sometimes arises as to whether it would be morally right to do certain actions from which good as well as bad effects follows. Meaning, is it morally right to do an act which entails good as well as bad effect, bad circumstances? The principle allows the actions to be morally permissible in those circumstances in which the bad effect is not intended but is a side effect of the actions only. So the answer is yes, as long as the actions or provided that one follows certain or follows the following conditions. So number one, the action must be naturally good in itself or at least morally indifferent. So it's very simple. The action needs just to be good or neutral. Number two, the good effect of the action must precede the evil effect. The evil effect is morally allowed to happen as a regrettable consequence, meaning the agent may not be positively will the bad effect, but may permit it to happen. If he could attain the good effect without the bad effect, then he should do so. The bad effect is sometimes said to be indirect voluntary. Then the third condition says that there must be a grave or sufficient reason in doing the act, meaning there must be a desperate need to do the action, or the situation must be at the point between life and death. Number four is the evil effect should not outweigh the good effect, or at least the good effect should be equivalent in importance to the evil effect. Meaning the good effect outweighs the bad effect in circumstances sufficiently grave to justify causing the bad effect, and the agent exercises due diligence to minimize the harm. Example for this is a pregnant woman who is in a critical condition, and the only way to save her life is to remove her uterus or the fallopian tubes, knowing that this procedure will cause the death of the fetus, and in which the woman is certain to die if the procedure will not be taken. So this circumstances is considered morally good or morally right, because first, the action is morally good since the intended effect is to save the woman's life and not to terminate the baby. Second, the good effect preceded the evil effect, because in performing the procedure, the woman's life was saved. Otherwise, would result in greater risk or the death of both the mother and the fetus. And third, there was a grave need to do the procedure, or neither of them would survive. And lastly, the good effect, which is having the woman's life saved, outweighs the bad effect, which is losing the fetus, and has minimized the greater possibility of losing both. So that is all for my report. Thank you.
The determinants of morality, the third and last fundamental principle of ethics. But first, what have you learned from the previous lesson of this chapter? Well, we have learned about the first three fundamental principles of ethics, and how they are necessities as guides to our evaluation and judgment of the right or wrong and good or bad human conduct. Now, what are determinants and how do they affect morality? According to Oxford Languages, determinants are factors which affects the nature and or outcome of something, or in simpler terms, they are sources. Thus, determinants of morality also means sources of morality, and they measure the goodness and evilness of the human act. For an action to be morally good, all three determinants must be good. A lack in any of them, at least in a qualified way, make the morality of the act to be bad. And there are three determinants of morality. The primary determinant is the end of the action, or in itself, which pertains to the natural purpose of the act, or that which the act, in its very nature, terminates or results. Thus, the end of studying about business ethics and social responsibility is learning about it. But let's dig deeper. The first determinant can also be referred to as object, which is what's actually done. There are actions that are objectively in conformity or not in conformity with the created human person, and thus actions in conformity with them or against them are objectively good or evil as such. However, the subjective nature of us as humans may reduce the culpability of our action if we do not know that the object of our action is morally evil. While this cannot change the objective nature of the act, one may be more or less morally responsible for the good or evil of the action based on one's knowledge of the objective character of the act. Second is the end of the actor or in its motive, which refers to obviously the motive or intention of the doer of the act. When it comes to the first determinant, one must remember that the motive varies while the end of the act is always the same. Thus the saying, the end does not justify the means. All intentions should be in conformity to the objective truth, and again, it is to be found in the eternal law. Humans, first of all, find this written in their hearts, and this participation of the rational creature in the eternal law is called the natural law. Conscience is closely related to this, as it is a judgment of reason. Our intentions then must be in conformity with our conscience. Besides the natural law, we also have the revealed truths from God, and we are obligated to form our conscience in accordance with both. Our culpability in this is only known perfectly by God. Then, the third and last determinant are the circumstances of the act that pertain to conditions that affect the human act by increasing or decreasing one's responsibility. The circumstances of an action are individual conditions of specific acts in time and place that are not of themselves part of the nature of the action. Who in here, the person the act is ascribed? What quality or quantity of the object of the act? Where, the place where the act is performed? By what means? The means employed by the actor. When? Circumstance of time. And why? The circumstances of end or intention of the act. Of course, circumstances, there are also principles. The principles involved in the circumstances of the action by Paul Glenn in the year 1968. First off is an indifferent act can become good or evil through circumstances. Like, for example, eating meat is indifferent. But eating meat on Good Friday intentionally is evil. Second, a good act can become evil through circumstances. Like giving money to the poor is, of course, very good. However, giving money to the same poor people to buy votes is evil. Third, an intrinsically good act can become better, or an intrinsically evil act can become worse through circumstances. Like, for example, visiting a sick person to comfort him is a very good action. However, not visiting a mother who is sick in the hospital out of hatred is worse. Now, fourth, an evil act can never become good through circumstances. Like stealing money to buy food cannot make the action of stealing good. And fifth, a good act done with evil means destroys the entire objective goodness of the act. Like giving food to the hungry is a good action, however, giving money to the hungry through robbery is evil. In the end, we all have to decide which choices we have to take. Hopefully, all our actions will be morally good. With that, we can live peacefully and happily in our future without questioning our pasts.